But welcome to metaLab's first externally hosted virtual talk. I am Sarah Newman. I go by my last name Newman, and I'm really excited today to be inviting Alex Reben in to share his work. Just a little bit more context about metaLab and who we are for those of you who are not part of the metaLab community, which looks like there's some of you whom I don't know. metaLab is a interdisciplinary research group at Harvard that's housed at the Berkman Klein Center, but university-wide, and we sit at the intersection of arts, technology, and humanities. So we do creative research projects that don't fit neatly into any particular category. Most of those deal with emerging technologies and critical questions about emerging technologies. And I got to know Alex Reben several years ago through my colleague Jessica Fjeld at the Berkman Klein Center Cyber Law Clinic. And I am a huge fan of his work. We were on a panel together a few years ago that was not virtual. And I've been following his work ever since with delight and gratitude. So just to tell you a little bit more about who Alex is, his work probes the inherently human nature of the artificial, he says on his website. He's an artist and roboticist who explores humanity through the lens of art and technology, using art as an experiment. His work allows for the viewer to experience the future within metaphorical contexts. He was trained at MIT, has shown broadly, including at places such as the Detroit Design Museum, the Mac Museum in Vienna, the Venice Biennale, Ars Electronica, the Tribeca Film Festival, the Camden Film Festival, and the Boston Cyber Arts Gallery, and has been covered in media by NPR, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post, Fast Company, PBS, BBC, and many other publications. He is a really terrific artist, and I'm thrilled to have him sharing some of his new work with us in this intimate seminar-like context. So the way it's going to work, just a little bit of housekeeping today before I hand it over to Alex. He's going to share work for about some period of time. That's probably around the first half of this hour. And you all should feel free to comment in the chat. I'll be kind of following the chat. You may have conversation with each other in the chat, or share notes or links, or use the chat however you like during that time, as is useful to you while Alex is presenting. I'll kind of keep track if there's questions that are coming in. And then for the second half, we're gonna have a Q&A. The session is being recorded for Alex, so keep that in mind, but you can always message us after if you don't want your image or likeness to be used in any way. We don't have any specific plans for the recording. We're just recording it because it's so convenient to be able to do so here. But please reach out to me, who is the one who sent you the invite, if you have any concerns or questions about that. And once we open it up to Q&A, we welcome questions on anything that Alex covered or didn't cover, and hopefully we'll have a really engaging discussion as well. So thank you so much for being here, and with that, I will hand it over to Alex.
Great, thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining. I know everyone's on different times and that sort of thing. I'll try to go through the presentation as quick as I can, because I always find these talks at metaLab, the most interesting parts for me, at least, are the questions and back and forth at the end. Yeah, broadly, I'm going to talk about decentralized digital art, and that word has a lot of meanings behind it, so I'm going to define how I'm talking about it. Yeah, and provide a few examples and show a bit of what I've been working on. Yeah, so previously, so I gave a previous talk at Harvard metaLab, and that was congruent with my show in Boston, which focused on artificial intelligence and artwork. Just an image from there. Various things. Last time I talked about the Crazy Bob Ross video. Things like AI oil paintings, just AI image painted by hand, and fortunes made by AIs and things of that sort. Since last time, just a couple quick updates. I've been working a lot with AI and faces. So I built a photo booth in which two people go into this photo booth, and it creates a mix of their faces. So it shows the midpoint of the vectors between their two faces, which is quite fun. A lot of people call it their face baby. You won't recognize any of those people since they're just normal folks. So here are a few examples of famous people, sort of run through that system. So this is Billy Bob Thornton and Billie Eilish. So quite funny. Lady Gaga and Morgan Freeman. Quite like the beard coming in and out. Yeah, there weren't too many babies, but this is Brad Pitt and a baby. I always find it interesting just how well these systems move between spaces. And I've been working on putting art through this system. So here's the Mona Lisa and Leonardo da Vinci, sort of going back and forth here. I also love how it keeps the crackly paint grain in there. A few more examples. So fun. And yeah, they can get pretty abstract here. I find quite great. Yeah, the flexibility of these systems always amaze me. Yeah, and I've also been thinking about art in the age of COVID, like I'm sure many of you are. Yeah, ideas for things that can be experienced by social distancing. So this is a work a robotic sculpture I started in 2016 called The Unbearable Lightness of Being a Bubble. This robot just keeps birthing these giant fog-filled bubbles that sort of wander away. Since it can be run in sort of large spaces, it's the type of thing that it'd be kind of great to have outside where people could watch in different spaces, or in just a huge indoor space as well. The fun part is when it makes its way to the end and pops. Okay, so here's how I'm defining decentralized digital art specifically. It's an artwork which can be rendered in a form independent from its limited edition medium in a distributable way. And hopefully what that means will become a bit more clear as we go along. Getting a bit into the history of this, not too far, one place to look is in the subgenre of conceptual art called instruction art. Here is one idea that's really close by Solowit. This is in for Boston Museum. Basically, what he would do is provide a series of instructions, and then those instructions were carried out by a person who was not the artist, in this case on a wall using pencil. And the idea here is that the conceptual nexus of the artwork is the instructions, which leads to questions of where exactly does the artwork exist. Given that the artwork is different every time, you can see this says 50 points at random. It's sort of an evolving thing that always changes. And the fact that you have to paint over it before putting it in a new place is interesting. This also leads to the question, I mean, anyone could put 50 points of pencil on their wall and draw between them, but that is not really an official, authentic edition of that artwork, which is a bit mind-boggling to people who don't quite understand how things like certificates of authenticity and that sort of thing work. So we're seeing a lot of these ideas become refreshed in the digital age. Here's another one by Lawrence Weiner. Basically, his instructions are to point a spray can at the floor and press the button down for 2 minutes, I believe. And then that itself is the artwork. You can see it can be different colors and different surfaces. Here's an edition that an artist put on their website that also said it was his artwork, but is it really, because it was not authorized? Again, these are questions which may come up in the digital art realm. And more recently, we've seen things like this, which made its way around the internet, where the banana and the duct tape weren't the things that were sold at the art fair. The instructions for putting the banana on the wall and the certificate of authenticity were what was sold. I believe there were 3 editions, and I think they sold for 115,000 each. This sort of gets into the weird world of commercial art, which is another beast on its own. But what all these have in common are the certificate of authenticity. So each one of them basically has a legal instrument as the sort of centralized nexus, the physical thing which defines that artwork. Because each one of those artworks can be performed or made by anyone, and you wouldn't be able to visually tell if they were genuine or not. It's more of the conceptual idea of the person who holds the certificate is the or organization that holds a certificate, are the people who are authorized to make an edition of that art that's authentic. So authenticity is very ingrained in a lot of these ideas. That's something I'll talk about a bit here. So moving into the more modern world, we've seen a lot of art on the blockchain. And the blockchain basically is a distributed ledger that everyone can check and verify, and it's cryptographically secure without going into too many of the technical details. So some of the aspects of blockchain art that are interesting is that ownership is determined by a non-fungible token on these blockchains. So you can think of this token as a certificate of authenticity. Non-fungible just means that it's a unique token, so it's something you can verify as being the token. So you can buy one of these artworks, and because it's a GIF or an image or a video, you don't actually own anything physical. You own this token, which then is cryptographically transferred to you. And if you were to sell or transfer this artwork, you would take that token and then send it to someone else. And again, this is all verified by cryptological methods. And again, the actual file of the artwork is public and it's able to be copied. So anyone can download the full resolution video and put it on their screen. But only one person or institution actually owns that artwork because they own the token. Other interesting aspects is because these tokens are programmable, you can do things like every time the token is sold, a percentage of that price that it's sold for can be sent back to the original artist, which is somewhat a new concept. Yeah, some places are 30%, 20% of future sales go back to the artist, which is great. Payment is in blockchain currency. So things like Ethereum or Bitcoin are used to pay for these artworks. And this is a website that I had used. There are a few of them out there. This one's called Super Rare. So you go to this website, you sign up to collect. People can place bids on these things. And can you still hear me?
Yeah, we lost your audio for a second, but hear you again.
Yeah, I just got a little notice here, but I'm okay now, right?
Okay, yeah, you're good.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so people can sign up to collect, they place bids, or you can list this at a particular price, and then that token that represents this artwork is transferred to someone else. Again, this particular GIF is public, so anyone can download it, which is quite interesting to me. There are other ways companies are using the blockchain. So this company called VerySart doesn't host the artwork, but basically they host certificates of authenticity for physical artworks like paintings or sculptures on the blockchain, so that if you sell a physical artwork, then you can also transfer that COA using the blockchain. It's all verifiable and cryptographically secure. So things like provenance become less of an issue because it's all stored on this public blockchain. And then other weird things are happening, like there's this company that you can buy a share in an artwork on the blockchain. So a bunch of people can come together and buy part of an expensive painting. So this is a very sort of stock market speculative version of these types of things, which again is quite bizarre to me. So getting into the types of things I've been working on that have to do with some of these themes. So a couple years ago, I think 2 years ago, at the Gray Area festival for blockchain art, I made my own token on the Ethereum blockchain called Tokenart. And everyone who came to this show got a badge with a unique token ID on it. And inside the badge, they also had a password to a wallet. So they could take that token out of their cryptographic wallet and transfer it to themselves like the other websites did. But my concept here was that the thing that you own is not the artwork. The thing that you own is a number that represents an artwork. So this will become a little clearer once I show this demo. So you'd go up and scan your code, and your code would generate something. So in this station, you went up, scanned your code, and you got a poem. So that poem would be the same poem every time, and your token basically generated that poem. But you could also, sort of close up there, you can get stickers. So you scanned your code and you got a particular face as a sticker. Here, you went up and scanned your code and you got a unique artwork that was animated on their big screen. So again, every time you scanned it, you get the same artwork because the token was the same. But the idea is that the token can make nearly infinite different types of artwork. So I could make more and more stations, or even stations that didn't exist here in the future. There was also a website you could go to enter in your token information, and that would generate an image online. So I thought it was an interesting concept wherein that you don't own any aesthetic output, you simply own a number. And that aesthetic output is created over time, and those types of outputs can change as I generated more. Yeah, there was no ownership of any physical media. Only a key was produced and varied to those artistic outputs. So even though they got sort of this physical badge, it was just a printout of their number. They don't actually need the badge in the future to use it. Here's Etherscan, which is basically a little tool where you can see tokens on blockchains. You can see I made 800 of these and 800 different addresses, 742 days ago. And this is actually something that will exist forever on this blockchain, and it's verifiable by anyone who wants to look up their number. So one of the big problems I encountered here was that blockchain is so sort of opaque and difficult to understand that no one really went and transferred their token outside of their wallet. So you can see there are 800 people who hold these tokens, but only one person actually personally transferred it into their account. So it was a interesting conceptual project for people who understood blockchain, but the amount of people who understood blockchain were quite few. Let me start my video again. Oh, there I am. Okay, sorry. I think my thing's glitching here. Anyway, but this was very informative to me, engaging the public with, complicated issues like blockchain and seeing how they react to it. People loved the sort of scanning and tangible back and forth. So they're really into that. They understood that their card made something that was unique, but getting further down into it, it was just hard to get people to, put in the time to understand conceptually what a token meant. And I've been working a bit with augmented reality. So here's a set of postcards I made. This uses a site called Artbreeder now to make these images as a model from there. That's also interesting, again, that you have this sort of worthless piece of paper, but you get this much deeper interaction with it when you bring it into the digital realm. I was experimenting with how to make a decentralized website. That is a website that isn't hosted anywhere. So I made this site called 4QR, where you can embed an entire HTML website page in a URL link. So this link down here actually produces a web page, and that web page isn't hosted anywhere. That web page is actually completely encoded in what this link is here. And there's a bit of a technical distinction there, but practically no one can actually take down this web page because it doesn't actually exist on a hard drive somewhere. But someone could take down 4qr.xyz, which does the translation, which can be a bit of a problem in the future, and something that I've fixed in the newer artworks I'm about to show. So that's one thing that led to this new series. Another thing that led to this new series were these code on canvas works that I was doing. So the idea here was that there were two canvases. One had the code that would generate the output that's on the other canvas. And these are oil paint on canvas here. So this sort of push and tug between the digital and physical realm of painting to me was quite interesting. Yeah, so that leads to now. So the newest series of works called Codeart Out, which have premiered at a group show at the Kate Vass Gallery, Switzerland. So these are self-contained digital artwork, which are rendered in a standard web browser, and you'll see what that means in a little bit. So just to start off with, making code art that works for everyone is kind of difficult because there are different programming languages and people are, different skills. So some people may know how to, compile code, but most people don't. But pretty much everyone who has a computer that has a web browser knows how to use it to navigate to things. And again, the statistics are 53% of the world's population has access to one, versus a much lower number probably that has access to a compiler or even knows how to use one. So these artworks leverage a little technical, I wouldn't call it a hack, but a technical part of the internet called a data URI. And a data URI is not a link to a website, but it is a string of text which actually produces a HTML web page. So here you see a stream of text, this sort of data text HTML. It says hello world. And below you see, if you paste this text into a web browser's address bar, you see it says hello world in a big font there. And this is not a link that's hosted anywhere. All that's happening is the browser is taking this line of text, interpreting it, and rendering it. So if you had a computer with a web browser but no access to the internet, it would still show you hello world. So it doesn't actually go out anywhere to get information. So again, all the information is encoded in this string here. So this is always risky, but I'm going to show a live, hopefully a live demo here of how this new series works, and just show you how easy it is for a layman to do it. So over here, I have a bunch of text and a text editor, and this is the artwork. This block of text is the digital artwork, and it's not rendered, it's not fully realized until you paste it into a browser. So I'm going to copy this. I'm just going to paste it right in here, and press enter. And here again, I could be completely disconnected from the internet, and you would still see this artwork. This happens to be a Conway's Game of Life simulation, and different colors. So all the information needed to make this artwork is contained in this paragraph of text here. And you can tell a normal person, hey, copy this text and paste it into a browser and press enter, and you get an artwork. So a normal person can compile this code without having any knowledge of what it does or how to code themselves. Is an important part here. Okay. So some of the decentralized properties of these artworks is that no central server is needed. Again, this is not on the internet anywhere. You can share this in an email, a text message, or later, as we'll see, on prints and QR codes. It can be rendered on multiple platforms. The only browser that this doesn't work on is Internet Explorer and Edge. A lot of things don't work properly on there. But if you saved that code as a .htm file, you actually can double click on that file and that will work in every web browser. So you also can save this code as a file, the same exact code. And there's no impedance to sharing. So there's no, there's nothing blocking you from sharing this or copying this or modifying this code in the future. So here's an example of a print. So this is the physical art object that's in the show. And on the top, since this is an animation, you can't really show animation on paper. So what I do is I choose several frames from the animation and print them in a grid. And on the bottom is a QR code, which contains the text, that copy and paste text that turns it into an artwork. And I chose a QR code specifically because people recognize it. It's an ISO standard, which means everyone in the world sort of agrees on its format. And it's something that's not going to go away soon. It's something that pretty much every cell phone supports, and it reads really quickly. And here's an example of scanning a QR code that has that code. It's just a QR code scanning app. I copy it to the clipboard. I move over to my web browser on my phone, and I just press enter. And again, it displays this artwork on a phone. And this phone could be in airplane mode, and it would still be showing this artwork again because it's not hosted anywhere. So here are some of the constraints I put on myself for these artworks. It's always good to sort of narrow yourself in. So it uses something called vanilla JavaScript. So it doesn't rely on anything which browsers don't support internally. Again, that's important because I want this to be able to run without access to the internet. It uses US keyboard characters only. That means that anyone who's looking at the text on a print can just copy it with their eyes and type it in if they wanted to. It fits within the constraints of a QR code. That's mostly about length. QR codes can only hold a certain amount of text. It runs on the top 2 most used web browsers. That's for compatibility. It's W3C valid code. That just means it's sort of standardized code that has no errors, and it's verifiable. It runs by pasting into an address bar or saving as a .htm file. And any output that differs between browsers and OS, I render them on the most used browser on my particular OS to make a print for. So there are different ways to render this. If you say, go to a gallery, see this print on a wall, and you copy the code or you copy the QR link with your phone, you can copy the human readable code with your eyeballs and paste that in an address bar. That's all manual. You can copy as, again, with your eyes and save it as a .htm file. You scan the QR code and paste into an address bar, sort of the easy way to do it, or you scan and save as a .htm file. Or I made a little web page, qr2a.xyz, that has a barcode scanner built in that you can scan, and it just automatically renders that artwork. That's non-archival because you can't count on a website being around in 20 years or 40 years or whenever I'm gone. And the thing about using vanilla JavaScript and regular HTML is that the likelihood that a browser is going to support this code way into the future is high, because browsers have to support old websites and browsers have to support legacy code. And even if it doesn't, it's quite easy to emulate a browser in the future. So say 60, 70 years from now, when I'm no longer around, someone should be able to render this code on some sort of platform we can't even foresee now because it's built around these standards that are so ingrained in the internet. So again, I've been doing different tangible forms, while the conceptual nexus of this is simply text. Again, like the SoloWit instructions, you know, making a physical manifestation and a certificate of authenticity is how the world works for collecting. So some of the tangible forms I've been working with are print with code and QR, like you saw there, a triptych where there's an image, a code, and a QR in 3 different pieces, or only the QR and code as a piece of paper. So there's no aesthetic output. You simply get the information, again, like something like SoloWit would do. Some of the other ways I've been working on, which are a little bit different from the outputs. These aren't the exact thing you would see on the screen just because they use physical methods, are robotic rendering. Been in touch with a mill to do tapestry. And as some of you might be aware, the Jacquard loom was a direct predecessor to punch cards, which led to computing and programming, and also a machine which uses code to make unlimited outputs. And I'll show some examples of these. And for me, this is a lot about showcasing the beauty of the code because it's sort of a visible thought pattern. It's, you get a direct look into the logic of what made the aesthetic outputs, which I find quite interesting. So even if you don't understand what's going on, you can get a bit of a viewpoint into that. And a bit of my artist statement here is high-level computer code is a representational language of mathematical logic from which seemingly infinite complexity can arise. Stemming from the most basic logic of 1 and 0, on and off, true and false, code's purpose is to abstract fundamental digital operations into a human, readable, and understandable form by leveraging the conventions of language and mathematics. The complexity which arises out of simple rules weaved together creates beauty from this conceptual yet constrained instruction set. So code and high-level code is completely about making humans interfacing with computers easier. Everything a computer does is with on and offs and ones and zeros, but it's nearly impossible for any one person to sort of wrap their mind around what that means. So all that operational information is abstracted into these computer code languages, which are what we as humans use to interact with the machines. And all those languages are ultimately taken down to these lower and lower levels, which are actually what's run on your computer. So here's a sort of blown up example of the code that you saw me scan with the phone before. It seems like a lot going on there, but I'm going to quickly run through some of it because I think even if you don't have any understanding of code, you can get a bit of an idea of what's going on here just with a little bit of explanation. Here what's highlighted is the actual meat of the code. Everything around the highlighted areas are just sort of housekeeping of getting everything set up, getting everything compatible to work on multiple platforms. So all the heavy lifting is done with just these few lines of code there. So the first thing that's on this code is this data text HTML. So I showed this before. This is what's called the data URI. This is telling the web browser that what is following this is HTML and JavaScript code. So it's not a link that you need to follow. It's something that you need to render, and you don't need to go online to do that. So it's just telling the web browser what you're about to do with it. This is just a little note telling the web browser that the document that's about to follow is an HTML document, which is just the type of code and language that this is written in. And this is just in there for compatibility sake for that W3C. Here's a comment. So this is just some text that I add in. So what this is every artwork I make has a 5-character ID number. So every artwork has not necessarily a serial number, but a number that can be used to verify the artwork and reference it. That's this X3SD4. And what comes after it is a cryptographic hash. So this long string of digits is created from a password that I, as an artist, only know. And basically this verifies that this artwork was made by me. And then if you give me this long string of characters later, I can then verify and say, yes, this is, or no, this isn't an artwork that I had made in the past, which is important, at least for me, to verify these sorts of things. I also do this on my certificates of authenticity to verify them later. So a little pretty much self describing, this is a title. So between these two little tags here, you're telling the web browser what the title is going to be, and this is what appears in the tab text in a web browser. Here is just a little bit of information telling the browser what sort of way I want it to style. This is telling the browser that I want it 100% the width and height, and I want it centered in the middle, and I want my background black. So here's where I tell the web browser that I'm about to draw things on the screen. So this sets up an area called a canvas, and a canvas is where you can draw things like circles and lines and colors. So I'm just creating a canvas and I'm calling it A. And this is maybe the most important part of the artwork. This is the seed number. So this is the number that defines the output. And if you change this number by even 1 digit, you'll get a completely different output. So this is the number that I chose as the artist for this particular output of this code. So you could take this code and change this number and create nearly infinite outputs and different types of artwork from the same bit of code. And again, I'll show some examples of that later. So this is me telling the browser I want the canvas to be 2160 pixels high and wide. This is 4K resolution because I'm about to do an animation. It's just a bit of housekeeping telling the browser that I'm about to do 2-dimensional stuff with the canvas. This is a pseudo-random number generator, which sounds a bit complicated, but basically it takes that seed number, and every time I ask this function for a number, it gives me one that's seemingly random every time. But importantly, the number that it gives me seemingly random every time is the same number. So this is deterministic. It's not actually different every time, but it's seemingly random, hence the pseudo-random moniker. And this is where the sausage is made. So this is where you're actually making the artwork. So I'm just telling the browser I want a rectangle colored red at 0, 0, which is the top left corner, and I want it the width and height of the screen. And I'm telling the browser I'm done with writing JavaScript, and that's it. So those are all the pieces that come together to make one of these artworks as far as the code goes. So if you look at it all at once, it seems like a whole bunch of gobbledygook, but each one of the sections is actually quite clear about what it's doing and telling the what it wants from the computer. So I'm going to quickly go through an example of something called a Truchet curve. And this is a 8-pointed tile. And if you arrange these tiles in different ways, you get very complex outputs. So I just want to show you can get quite a bit of complexity out of fairly simple rules in a lot of these bits of code. So here are the 10 tiles that are possible with the Truchet curves. And they all have these 8 points. There are no other ways to connect these points which aren't rotationally unique. And by rotationally unique, I mean if you take one tile and rotate it 90 degrees, you get these 4 different outputs. So you get quite different visual outputs every time you rotate one of these, except obviously for the ones that are rotationally the same. There are a few in there, like the lines crossing over here. Yeah, so if you take a bunch of those tiles and just snap them together, again, starting with those simple rules, you get these quite complex outputs. And these are using the colors that I showed before. Say you change everything to black, you get these black tiles. You can make interesting videos. So this just randomly changes the tile over time. Again, this is sort of with colors. So you can see even with these sort of just simple ideas to start with, you can get quite in depth with the visual outputs. Yeah, and make them sort of huge, working on that as well, because you can print out smaller tiles, and because of the way these are laid out, you can be guaranteed no matter how you put together printouts of tiles in any direction, they will snap together. And there's a banana for scale. See how big it is. Yeah, so you know, everyone loves throwing stuff in robots. So this is a robot rendering one of the outputs with a calligraphy pen. Yeah, one of the things I find cool about this is that even though it's robotic, the fact it's using physical media means there's going to be slight differences in, you know, how thick the ink is, how the ink's slightly moving. So versus an output you would render on a screen, this has a bit of uniqueness to it. So even if I were to make another print of this with the robot, it would be just slightly different because the ink would be flowing different and such. Yeah, here it's using two colored pens. Here's the output from that. Here's another one using white ink on black paper, which is actually something you can't do in a printer. So it really leverages the power of the robot to do something which is unique. Every time I use the robot, I like to ask myself, like, why do this versus just printing something out? So I like to use kind of the unique nature of what the robot is. And here's an example of a program with different seed numbers. So again, that was that long digit number I showed before. And you can see how the style was the same, but the exact type of tree that it rendered each time is different. So these are 5 different versions of the artwork. And each print I make is unique because each one uses a different seed number. And here's a example of a diptych. It's going to be a triptych. The QR code is missing, but this is an idea of how, you know, the printouts of the code can be physically separate from the prints of the output. This is a 17 by 22 print here. And here's an example of the code and the QR code and the output as one print. Yeah, so again, changing the seed number. Here's a few different outputs of the same code. Yeah, and just sort of to wrap things up, show you a whole bunch of examples of different types of outputs I'm working on. Again, anything that's animated, I do this idea of having different frames shown as the physical print. And here's the print of that live demo that I did. You can see over time the code evolving. And again, anyone can scan these QR codes and copy this code and get the full 100% resolution out from there. Some sort of clouds. Yeah, and the for static prints that aren't animations, they are rendered at 100 megapixels. So by copying the code, you actually get quite a high quality output and something you can print on your own. That to me raises kind of interesting questions about copyright and authorship and things you guys at the metaLab dig in deeper than I do. Yeah, so a couple more conceptual ideas, and we're sort of wrapping up here, is to create a machine that generates infinite artworks. So every time you press a button, you get a new code which changes the seed number. So every time you press the button, it makes a new seed number. So you can scan it again, copy it, and you get that output. And I find this quite interesting because here you're not collecting a individual artwork. You would be having the machine which creates infinite artworks. So again, sort of flipping on its head what the actual ownership of the idea means. And because receipt printers in themselves aren't archival, the fact that you have the code means if you wanted to in the future, you could translate this into a different printing machine and keep printing more of them. So from an archival point of view, which is always a problem with digital and mechanical art, this is something that could be rebuilt because all the information is inherently encoded in the artwork itself. Sort of another fun robotic example, a bit more sort of spirography. Again, doing things that you can't do on a printer. So this is using silver ink on a panel to make outputs. And yeah, obviously, the most pedestrian thing is to output these things on a screen. So here's a screen example. Yeah, sort of the last thing I've been playing with is encoding entire songs in these codes. So this is a little glitch song, which is entirely contained within that QR code. So all the information to make the visuals, the music, and the sounds and the synthesizer are all contained within that information inside a little CD case, which I just thought was kind of fun. Yeah, so I mentioned before, there's this website, qr28.xyz. This is what you can go to try stuff, and this has the QR code scanner built in, and these other ways to experience the work, and there's a little gallery in there to see stuff. Yeah, and that's it. I'm gonna wrap up here and take any questions. There's a lot of stuff, but yeah, hopefully there's something interesting in there for everyone.
Great, Alex, thank you so much. That was fantastic. Yeah, there's a ton of amazing ideas that you shared. I have plenty of questions myself, but I'd like to open it up to the room. So if you have a question, feel free to type it in the chat or just turn your audio on and you can ask, and we'll see if I can moderate a Zoom room. All right, so we have a question here from Leah. How do you fill a bubble with fog?
That was something that actually took me quite a long time to get right. Yeah, it obviously uses a fog machine, but getting the fog consistency correct, and more importantly, getting the bubble formulation correct are kind of the most important things. So having a bubble which is robust enough to hold on to the fog for a while needed a secret formula of bubble chemistry that I had to come up with. The other kind of secret to it is laminar flow. So if you just were to inject a fog machine into a bubble, it would pop it immediately. So behind the bubble, it's hard to see in the video, and that was just a prototype. There's a tube filled with straws, and as you push the fog through those straws, it makes the turbulent nature of the fog all move in one direction, and that direction pushes into the bubble and then closes it behind it. So it's a very smooth flow. So that's kind of the secret there, besides my sort of patented bubble formula. And also getting the bubble to the right size and closing it at exactly the right time is also very important. So that took quite a lot of experimentation. and I'm still looking for like the perfect place to show that. One problem is that if there's too much wind, it can pop the bubble prematurely. So having like a warehouse space or maybe turbine hall would be a good place to to show that sort of thing.
Great, thanks. A couple more questions have come in. One is, when did you realize, from Naniette, when did you realize or acknowledge that you were an artist?
Yeah, I guess that's a good question. You know, I don't think it was like any sort of one aha moment. I mean, I had been starting to do that sort of stuff, I'd say, as an undergrad. I mean, I showed my first artwork in a show, in an undergrad show, although I was you know, studying engineering at the time. Yeah, then you know, I had been sort of happening in parallel, making stuff. Then went to the, you know, the media lab, which in itself is kind of this multidisciplinary space. Yeah, I guess I'd say maybe 8 years ago, I had yeah, started to do art pretty much full time, which is a weird way to go, but yeah, I'd say there's no there's no one moment, but I guess a gradient of time.
I have a follow-up question to that, but I'm going to save it because we're getting some other questions here. One from Mason. I hate to typecast myself here, but have you thought about whether the code to art projects are copyrightable? What would it be, the code or the artwork?
Yeah, so
Copyright, and does storing COAs on the blockchain obviate the need for copyright?
so yeah, as far as what I understand is that code that generates output, the output is not copyrightable, but the code is copyrightable, which is interesting. So the artwork that the code generates is not, but the code itself could be. Again, you guys know much better than I do. So I know that like AIs that generate output, say you just generated a file full of output, I don't think that automated output is copyrightable. My guess is that if I print it out and make a physical print, I could probably copyright that. But that's actually a question I'm leaving open, and that's actually one of the questions I want part of this series is, you know, where is copyright, where is ownership? If you can take the full 100 megapixel thing home and print it yourself, I think those are interesting things. As far as obviating certificate of authenticity because of the blockchain, I mean, that's, you know, what Verisart's trying to do. They're trying to move away from paper to the blockchain. But you know, I find a lot of collectors still want some physical thing. You know, I sold an edition of that Bob Ross video. You know, it's a video, so pretty much the thing that I sold was a piece of paper and, you know, a DVD that was archival that I would hand over to the collector.
A question from Jess. What would a decentralized gallery show of the decentralized URL works look like?
Yeah, so this is something I've been talking to a couple places about, and there's definitely interest, especially now since museums can't really open. Everyone's trying to scramble to figure out what net art means all of a sudden. Yeah, one interesting way we've been talking is just like, it's hard to do any decentralized distribution because there's always an email server or, you know, newsletter, but that's what we've been talking about, newsletters or email, sharing them on social media. One idea was to mail people postcards with QR codes, which I found quite interesting. So because the core of the artwork is just the code itself, you actually can put it on multiple different types of mediums and share it in different ways. So I think the real answer is just sharing it in as many different ways as you can. Yeah, I'll also be putting them on like Super Rare and those other blockchain places to be decentralized in that way.
Great. We have a question from Matthew. Programmers often have talked about code in aesthetic terms, using words like elegance. Do you think about the aesthetics of the code and the output artwork as distinct or linked?
Yeah, so the code that I have to use for these particular works, because they have to fit in a QR code, I can't be as elegant or practice as good programming practices as I might normally be able to. Like all the variables are usually one letter, and you don't want to do that because it's hard to follow that. Usually you want to call a variable like, you know, a square color versus just C, so people can understand that code. I also use things called minifiers for JS, which take code which is kind of pretty, then compress them down to make them smaller. So by the very nature of trying to make this code as small as I can, I'd say some of the elegance of that code is missing. Although, on the other hand, I would say some of the elegance of just how these algorithms work are definitely still in there. So things like how the elegance of game of life and how it makes things look as it moves, just the elegance of sort of simple logic making complex things are in there. But that's less of a visual thing, like how nicely code can be formatted, and I guess more of a practical thing.
Great. These are terrific questions. Keep them coming. I'm going to ask a couple while there's nothing in the queue, since we have a few minutes left. One is anyone else doing, specifically for this last work, is anybody else that you know of doing this? Because I haven't seen anything like it, and to me it seems like really amazing. And so I'm curious if there's other folks doing this, or if you kind of just basically figured this out and came up with this.
Yeah, so for our works, I hate saying like the first to X or the first to Y, because I usually feel like that's a a bit of a cop out, and the work should be interesting in its own. But I had actually assumed that there must have been artists in the past that have included code as part of the aesthetic object, like I'm doing here, and sort of exposed it. There certainly have been artists who have like released their code open source, but usually that's not in conjunction with the object itself. Usually that's something that's sort of secondary. So as far as I know, I haven't found any other artist that's released code as part of the aesthetic object like I'm doing here. If anyone knows of one, please let me know. Again, there's been instruction artists like Soloet who, wasn't code, but it was instruction. There was some artists who released things like the binary code for Turing machine, but that's quite different. That was sort of a general purpose thing. I certainly don't know of any artists that released code that the public could easily also use. That to me was sort of an important variable here, because it could have used processing or it could have used C++, but those would have been hard for other people.
That's one of the things I really like about it, is being able to generate something has the same resolution aesthetic sort of on one's own device, and how simple it is to translate that. Matthew mentioned Nick Muntford, who uses code as poetry. We have another question here from Phil. What other contemporary artists do you find most inspiring in terms of generative and or decentralized techniques?
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, a lot of the artists I had followed have been more in sort of the robotic and sort of mechanical artwork, just because that's what I had sort of been traditionally working on. I would say a lot of what I see, it's interesting. I think the way I've consumed art has changed. I see a lot of it on Instagram. And when I see it on Instagram, I guess I pay less attention of who made it, and just like, because it's such a deluge of information. So I'd say something like Instagram as a platform has been kind of inspiring, just by the way it's been curating things. Yeah, thinking about that now, it's kind of a shame that the artist names became kind of lost there. Yeah, so there have been artworks that have inspired me, but recalling the names, I can't right now. But if I brought them up again, I'd be able to connect them.
We have another, but other folks, I mentioned one artist in the chat to Phil, and other folks should feel free to share ideas here if you have other folks you're looking at or thinking about. We have a comment from Magda who said, when we think about it, musical notes are a form of code, and often music is mathematical. And it kind of works the same way you read notes, which are abstract, and you get music. So it's a nice connection.
Yeah, for sure. I'd say one difference there is you need skill to be able to translate that to output, unless it's something like a MIDI file where you're just kind of playing it. But again, that gets actually sort of back into the code and file point of view. But yeah, there have been a lot of notation systems. I mean, you can look at language itself as a way to transfer information, and you can view as if you look at poetry, you can think of that as a way to sort of implant imagery in people's minds. So I think there's sort of more abstract ways to look at it as well.
Well, I have one final question for you, which is a little bit of an self-indulgent question, because I feel like one of the things about having an artist talk in this forum is we get to kind of pull back the curtain a little bit and learn about kind of process. So my question is how you come up with your ideas. We saw a lot of your outputs, which are super fascinating and terrific. And I'm curious if it kind of starts, just speaking as an artist and knowing what my process is, does it start more from like a visual idea of something you would like to make and then figuring out the technology to do it, or is it more like being intrigued with the specific technology and then creating output, or are they back and forth, or is there anything you can share that wasn't in your presentation about your process?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely both. Sometimes I'll see something, it's like, ooh, can I, make that pattern or play with that pattern. Something like Conway's Game of Life is a very sort of well understood algorithm that I sort of put my own spin on. On the flip side, sometimes I find, I'm playing with an algorithm or an idea, and I just sort of tweak things around and get sometimes unexpected output that I sort of go down rabbit holes with. So I'd say it's both. Sometimes it's like planned that, I sort of have a vision for something and try to get there with the code, or it's sort of playing around with variables or numbers and getting unexpected outputs. There's definitely a mix of both.
Thanks. And then Mason says more as a comment, it's interesting that HTML5 and the campus tag enabled this work. I'd love to hear about other art enabling standards another time though, perhaps.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, just because of how prolific web browsers are and how standardized they are, and how much power is included by default in them, at least to me, that was sort of the most powerful platform. But yeah, a lot of stuff is built on standards, but also a lot of stuff is built on libraries like processing and, open frameworks and things like that.
Great. Well, we're just about at time, and I just wanted to ask you, Alex, while we still have everybody here, is there anything that, we have a pretty, a diverse set of folks here from different places around the world, and with different communities and backgrounds and connections. I wanted to know if there was anything you would like of us, if are you trying to get either the work out or share it elsewhere, or any kind of feedback in particular forms of connection. I mean, it's been really generous of you to take your time. I just want to know if there's anything we can do in return for those of us.
Yeah, I'm always looking for obviously places to show things. Right now, a lot of this work is at Kate Vass Gallery in Switzerland. Right now, COVID's putting a damper on things like creating photo booths where people can come and experience them or things like that. So I'm definitely trying to find a big place for that bubble. So some museum or warehouse or some crazy place for that. Yeah, finding places to put these works, just sharing on social media, getting people to copy and paste this stuff, would be helpful. A question I always ask when, I talk to you guys is if you can think of any laws which are inherent on the limitations of human ability. And I haven't got a good answer for that. And this sort of goes back to the all prior art project that I did, where I tried to generate ideas and publish them because prior art laws weren't built with the idea of AIs and machine learning in mind. So that's sort of a series I'm always interested in working on when it comes to law. Yeah, it's kind of abstract, but yeah.
That's great. Well, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. Folks, Alex's Twitter is here, and really appreciate you all joining. And if you have ideas for future artists you'd like to hear from in this series, which began today, please reach out to me, and just really appreciate you all coming in, especially thank you to Alex.
Yeah, Instagram is the best way to see new images, and yeah, go to qr2a.xyz to play around with this stuff for yourself.
Thank you so much, Alex.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.